I stood outside my sister Emma's debt-free celebration party, clutching an envelope containing my own six-figure medical school loan statements. Through the window, I watched my parents raise champagne toasts to Emma's achievement, while completely ignoring my identical accomplishment. My mother's voice echoed, "She deserves it more, honey." My hands shook as I realized the devastating truth. My parents had paid off Emma's entire medical school debt but left me drowning in my own. Tonight, everything would change when I discovered the real reason behind their favoritism. Growing up as twins with Emma in suburban Denver, I always sensed something different about how our parents treated us. Robert and Linda, both successful attorneys with their own firm, seemed to have an endless supply of praise for Emma, while my achievements earned polite acknowledgement at best. When Emma scored 98% on her SATs, they threw a celebration dinner. When I scored 99% 2 weeks later, they said, "Good job, Jeffrey," and moved on to discussing Emma's college applications. The pattern continued through our undergraduate years at the University of Colorado. Emma majored in biology, while I chose biochemistry, both of us maintaining perfect GPAs. Yet somehow, Emma's academic success warranted expensive celebration dinners and proud phone calls to relatives, while my Dean's List achievements merited a brief nod of approval. I told myself it was my imagination, that parents couldn't possibly love one child more than another. When we both decided on medical school, our parents gathered us in their study for what they called the financial discussion. Robert leaned back in his leather chair, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used in courtrooms. "Medical school is expensive, but we want both of you to focus on your studies without worrying about money. We'll take care of everything financially." Linda nodded enthusiastically, her manicured hands gesturing toward the family photos lining the mahogany shelves. "Your father and I have worked hard to ensure our children have every opportunity. Consider it our investment in your futures." Those words carried me through 4 grueling years at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. While Emma seemed to glide through the curriculum with ease, I struggled to balance 18-hour study days with night shifts as a hospital aide to cover my living expenses. My parents assured me the job was unnecessary, that they'd handle all financial obligations, but I wanted to contribute something toward my education. The medical school years blurred together in a haze of anatomy labs, clinical rotations, and endless examinations. Emma and I pushed each other academically, sharing study guides and quiz sessions in the library until security forced us out at midnight. Despite the competitive nature of medical school, we maintained our close bond, celebrating each other's successes and providing comfort during the inevitable failures. Our graduation day arrived on a perfect May morning, with families gathering in the university's football stadium to watch their future doctors receive their diplomas. Emma and I both graduated summa cum laude, our identical achievements representing 4 years of sacrifice and dedication. As we posed for photos in our caps and gowns, our parents beamed with pride, promising us that the hard part is over now. 3 weeks later, I discovered how wrong they were. The revelation came during what was supposed to be a simple family dinner at Emma's new apartment. She'd found a beautiful 1-bedroom place in downtown Denver, complete with granite countertops and a view of the mountains. As we toured the space, I commented on how expensive downtown rent had become for residents just starting their careers. Emma laughed, pouring wine into expensive crystal glasses I'd never seen before. "Oh, I don't have to worry about rent for a while. Mom and Dad took care of everything." Uncle Frank, who'd driven down from Fort Collins for the dinner, raised his eyebrows in surprise. "That's incredibly generous. I remember how tight money was during my residency years." "Well," Emma said, settling into her new leather sofa, "they did more than help with rent. They actually paid off my entire student loan debt right after graduation. $200,000, gone just like that." The wine glass slipped from my hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. The room fell silent as the implications of Emma's casual statement hit me like a physical blow. My identical student loan debt of $203,000 remained untouched, accumulating interest with each passing day. Uncle Frank looked confused, glancing between Emma and me. "But surely they did the same for Jeffrey, right? You both graduated together." The silence stretched uncomfortably, until Emma finally spoke, her voice smaller now. "I assumed they had plans for Jeffrey's loans too." Different timing, maybe. But I knew better. Deep in my chest, a cold understanding settled like ice water in my veins. Our parents had made a choice, and that choice didn't include me. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house in Cherry Hills Village, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. The sprawling colonial sat on 2 acres of perfectly manicured lawn, its circular driveway lined with imported stone pavers. Growing up, this house had represented security and success. Today, it felt like enemy territory. I found Robert and Linda in their study, the same room where they'd promised to support both their children through medical school. Robert sat behind his mahogany desk reviewing legal briefs, while Linda organized files in the adjacent cabinet. The morning sunlight streaming through tall windows cast long shadows across the Persian rug, where Emma and I had played as children. "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me. Linda looked up with a smile that faltered when she saw my expression. "Jeffrey, honey, what's wrong? You look upset." I found out about Emma's loans. The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I was past caring about diplomatic approaches. "You paid off her debt. All of it. $200,000. Robert didn't look up from his papers. "Emma's financial situation is between us and Emma." "What about my financial situation?" I moved closer to the desk, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "What about the promise you made to both of us? You said you'd take care of everything financially." Now Robert raised his head, his gray eyes cold and calculating. "We never promised identical treatment, Jeffrey. We promised support, and we've provided that support according to what we believe is best for each of you individually." Linda moved to stand beside her husband, her expression shifting from surprised to defensive. "Honey, you have to understand that Emma has more potential for success in her chosen specialty. She's planning to pursue pediatric surgery, which requires significant additional training and financial investment. We're simply positioning her for the greatest possible impact." The words hit me like a slap across the face. More potential for success? We graduated with identical honors from the same medical school. We both matched into residency programs at Denver General Hospital. "But you chose family medicine," Robert said, his tone dismissive. "Emma chose pediatric surgery. There's a significant difference in earning potential and societal contribution." I stared at my father, searching for any sign of the man who'd taught me to ride a bicycle and cheered at my baseball games. Instead, I found a stranger evaluating me like a disappointing investment portfolio. "So my choice to serve underserved communities makes me less deserving of your support?" Linda's voice took on a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "Jeffrey, you've always been more independent than Emma. You don't need our help as much as she does. You'll find a way to manage your debt because that's who you are. Emma needs the security of financial freedom to reach her full potential." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the core message remained unchanged. My parents had decided Emma deserved priority, and no amount of logical argument would change their minds. As I prepared to leave, Robert delivered the final blow. "There's something else you should know," he said, not bothering to look up from his papers. "We're also funding Emma's pediatric surgery fellowship at Johns Hopkins. The program costs $60,000 in tuition and fees, plus living expenses in Baltimore. We've committed to covering everything for the 2-year program." I stood frozen in the doorway, processing this additional betrayal. "And what about my residency funding? Family medicine programs don't pay as well as surgical residencies." "You'll manage," Linda said, already turning back to her filing. "You always do." I drove home in a daze, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of my parents' favoritism. This wasn't about money or practical considerations. This was about fundamental love, respect, and value. In their eyes, I was the expendable child, the one who could fend for himself while Emma received every advantage they could provide. That evening I called Emma to confront her about her knowledge of the situation. Her defensive response cut deeper than my parents' cold calculations. "I didn't ask them to pay off my loans," she said, her voice sharp with annoyance. "They offered, and I accepted. What was I supposed to do? Refuse their generosity out of some misguided sense of fairness? You could have told me," I said. "You could have asked them to treat us equally. Jeffrey, you always land on your feet anyway. You don't need their help as much as I do." Surgery is incredibly demanding, and financial stress would interfere with my training. The line went quiet for several seconds before Emma spoke again, her tone softer but no less hurtful. Look, I know this seems unfair, but Mom and Dad are being practical. I'm going into a field where I'll save children's lives. You're choosing family medicine because it's easier and less stressful. They're investing in the child who will make the bigger impact. I hung up without responding, staring at my reflection in the apartment window. Even Emma, my twin sister and closest companion since birth, saw me as the lesser sibling. The betrayal felt complete. My girlfriend Jessica found me sitting on my apartment balcony the next morning, staring blankly at the Denver skyline while my coffee grew cold in my hands. A financial analyst for Wells Fargo, Jessica possessed the kind of sharp, analytical mind that could spot inconsistencies others missed. "You look like someone stole your dog," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "Want to talk about it?" I told her everything, from the graduation revelation to my parents' cold justification of their favoritism. Jessica listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "Something doesn't add up," she said when I finished. "Your parents are successful attorneys, but paying off $200,000 in student loans plus funding a $60,000 fellowship represents a significant financial commitment. Most families, even wealthy ones, don't have that kind of liquid cash available without some kind of structured planning." "They've always been good with money," I said, but Jessica was already shaking her head. "Good with money means having investments and retirement savings. What you're describing suggests access to a substantial fund specifically designated for educational expenses." "Jeffrey, when did your grandfather pass away?" "My maternal grandfather, William Harrison, had died when Emma and I were 15 years old. A successful oil executive, he'd always taken special interest in our education, paying for private tutoring and promising to support our college dreams." "Why?" I asked, though a cold suspicion was already forming in my mind. "Because grandparents often establish educational trusts for their grandchildren. If your grandfather was wealthy enough to make those kinds of promises, he might have left money specifically for you and Emma's education." That afternoon, Jessica helped me access family financial documents I had legitimate access to as my parents' emergency medical contact. The papers were stored in their home office filing cabinet, organized with the meticulous attention to detail that characterized both my parents' professional lives. What we found exceeded my worst fears. The Harrison Educational Trust, established by my grandfather 6 months before his death, contained $2.4 million, specifically designated for the medical education and career support of William Harrison's grandchildren, Jeffrey Harrison Fletcher and Emma Harrison Fletcher, to be distributed equally between both beneficiaries. The trust documents, written in my grandfather's careful handwriting and notarized by 3 witnesses, explicitly stated that both grandchildren were to receive identical support throughout their medical training, including undergraduate preparation, medical school tuition, residency support, and initial practice establishment funds. Jessica's hands shook as she photographed the relevant pages with her phone. "Jeffrey, this is incredibly specific language. Your grandfather wanted to ensure both you and Emma received equal treatment. He even included provisions for ongoing career support after residency completion." I found additional documents detailing the trust's administration since my grandfather's death. My parents, as designated trustees, had received quarterly distributions of funds specifically earmarked for educational expenses. The paper trail showed regular withdrawals corresponding exactly to Emma's tuition payments, living expenses, and debt elimination, while no corresponding distributions had been made for my benefit. But the most damaging evidence lay in a folder marked Trust Correspondence. Inside, I discovered email exchanges between my parents and the trust administrator, Margaret Thornton, dating back 3 years. The emails revealed a systematic campaign to justify the unequal distribution of funds. Robert had written to Margaret explaining that Jeffrey lacks Emma's commitment to medicine and will likely change careers within 5 years of graduation. Linda had added her own assessment that Jeffrey's choice of family medicine demonstrates limited ambition and doesn't warrant the same level of investment as Emma's surgical career. In one particularly damaging exchange, Robert had written, "Jeffrey has always been the more independent child, and doesn't require the same level of support as Emma. We believe concentrating the trust resources on Emma's surgical training will produce better outcomes for the family and society. Margaret Thornton's responses showed increasing concern about the unequal treatment. In her most recent email, dated just 2 months ago, she'd written, "I'm uncomfortable with the continued disparity in distributions. The trust language is clear about equal treatment, and I'm obligated to ensure compliance with William Harrison's wishes." My parents' response had been to threaten Margaret with replacement as trust administrator if she continued questioning their decisions. Jessica and I sat in stunned silence as the magnitude of the betrayal became clear. This wasn't favoritism based on parental preference. This was theft of my rightful inheritance, justified by character assassinations my parents had crafted to rationalize their betrayal. The final blow came in the form of a draft letter Robert had prepared but never sent, outlining plans to transfer the remainder of my trust fund inheritance to establish a pediatric surgery scholarship in Emma's name at Johns Hopkins. The letter explained that Jeffrey's lack of surgical ambition makes him unsuitable for the remaining trust funds, which would be better utilized supporting future pediatric surgeons. They weren't just stealing my present support. They were planning to eliminate my future inheritance entirely, ensuring that Emma received not just her own trust funds but mine as well. I called in sick to my hospital rotation the next day, unable to face the thought of treating patients while my own family systematically destroyed my future. Jessica took a personal day to help me document everything we'd discovered, creating a comprehensive file that painted a clear picture of financial misconduct and trust fund violations. The evidence was overwhelming, but confronting my parents again felt impossible. They'd already demonstrated their willingness to lie directly to my face while stealing my inheritance. What would prevent them from destroying the evidence or transferring the remaining funds beyond my reach? That evening, Jessica made the suggestion that would change everything. "Jeffrey, you need legal representation. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is trust fund mismanagement and potential fraud. Your parents are fiduciaries with legal obligations to treat you fairly, and they violated those obligations in the most egregious way possible." She was right. My family had declared war on my future, and I needed to fight back with every weapon at my disposal. The next morning, I called Margaret Thornton directly, identifying myself as William Harrison's grandson and expressing concerns about the trust administration. Her relief was palpable when she realized I was aware of the unequal treatment. "Jeffrey, I've been deeply troubled by your parents' decisions regarding fund distributions," Margaret said, her voice carrying the weight of professional frustration. "The trust language is absolutely clear about equal treatment, and I've documented my concerns extensively in my correspondence with them." Margaret agreed to meet with me that afternoon at her downtown office. A petite woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. She'd been administering trusts for over 30 years and had never encountered such blatant disregard for a grantor's wishes. "Your grandfather was very specific about his intentions," she explained, spreading the original trust documents across her conference table. "He wanted both you and Emma to have identical opportunities, free from any parental favoritism or financial pressure. He'd observed how money could divide families and was determined to prevent that outcome." Margaret showed me additional documentation I hadn't seen, including quarterly reports she'd submitted to my parents detailing available funds and recommended distribution schedules. The reports clearly indicated sufficient money to support both Emma and me equally throughout our medical training and beyond. "The trust currently contains $1.8 million, Margaret continued. "Based on the original distribution schedule, you should have received approximately $350,000 by now to cover your undergraduate preparation, medical school debt, and initial residency support." The number staggered me. My parents hadn't just denied me the $200,000 for loan payoff. They'd stolen an additional $150,000 that should have supported my education and early career development. "What are my options?" I asked. Margaret's expression hardened. "You have every right to challenge the trust administration and demand immediate compliance with your grandfather's wishes. The evidence of unequal treatment is overwhelming, and any court would find in your favor." That afternoon, I contacted Patricia Hoffman, an estate attorney Jessica's law firm had recommended. Patricia specialized in trust disputes and had built her reputation fighting for beneficiaries whose rights had been violated by unscrupulous trustees. Patricia reviewed my evidence with growing amazement. Jeffrey, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of trust mismanagement I've encountered. Your parents have violated their fiduciary duty in multiple ways, and the email evidence shows deliberate intent to circumvent your grandfather's wishes. She explained that as trust beneficiaries, my parents had legal obligations to treat Emma and me fairly, maintain accurate records, and prioritize our interests above their own preferences. They'd violated each of these obligations repeatedly and systematically. We'll file for immediate injunctive relief to freeze all further distributions, pending a full accounting of trust activities, Patricia continued. We'll also seek restitution of all funds that should have been distributed to you, plus damages for the harm their actions have caused to your career and financial position. The legal strategy was aggressive but necessary. My parents had demonstrated they wouldn't voluntarily comply with the trust terms, making court intervention the only viable option. While Patricia prepared the legal documents, I began documenting the broader pattern of discrimination I'd experienced. The evidence went far beyond financial inequality to include career sabotage I'd never recognized. I discovered that when residency programs had called my parents for character references, Robert and Linda had provided lukewarm recommendations that subtly undermined my candidacy. They'd told program directors that, while I was academically capable, I lacked the dedication and focus necessary for demanding medical specialties. One particularly damaging reference, which I obtained through a sympathetic program coordinator, included Robert's assessment that I was more likely to leave medicine for other pursuits and possessed limited long-term commitment to patient care. These comments had cost me opportunities at several prestigious programs, forcing me into less competitive positions. Meanwhile, Emma had received glowing parental references, describing her as exceptionally dedicated, uniquely qualified for surgical training, and destined for leadership in pediatric medicine. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or more deliberate. I also learned that my parents had been funding Emma's attendance at expensive medical conferences and networking events, while never informing me such opportunities existed. Emma had attended the American College of Surgeons annual meeting, the Pediatric Surgery Foundation Symposium, and multiple regional conferences, all at my parents' expense. When I confronted Emma about these advantages, her response revealed how thoroughly she'd bought into our parents' narrative about our relative worth. Jeffrey, those conferences were specifically relevant to my specialty, she said, her tone suggesting I was being unreasonable. You chose family medicine because you wanted a less demanding career. Why would you need the same professional development opportunities? Her casual dismissal of my career choice stung almost as much as my parents' betrayal. Emma had accepted the premise that her goals were inherently more valuable than mine, justifying any level of unequal treatment. The breaking point came when I learned about Emma's upcoming trip to the International Pediatric Surgery Conference in Geneva. My parents had not only paid the $5,000 registration fee, but were covering her airfare, hotel accommodations, and meal expenses for the week-long event. When I asked about similar support for family medicine conferences, Linda's response was dismissive. Jeffrey, family medicine doesn't require the same level of specialized training as surgery. You don't need expensive international conferences to be competent in primary care. Her words crystallized everything I'd suspected about my parents' fundamental disrespect for my chosen specialty, and by extension, my value as their son. That evening, I made the decision that would define the rest of our family relationships. I would fight back with every legal weapon at my disposal, regardless of the personal cost. Jessica supported my decision completely. Jeffrey, they've stolen your inheritance and sabotaged your career while pretending to love you equally. You don't owe them politeness or family loyalty when they've shown you none. Patricia had the legal papers ready within 48 hours. The complaint detailed every instance of trust, mismanagement, financial discrimination, and career sabotage we'd uncovered. The requested relief included immediate restitution, ongoing compliance monitoring, and removal of my parents as trust administrators. I decided the papers should be served during Emma's farewell party for her Geneva conference trip. My parents had invited the extended family to celebrate Emma's latest professional achievement, making it the perfect venue to reveal their systematic betrayal of their other child. The plan was set. In 72 hours, my family would learn the price of treating one child as expendable while elevating the other to undeserved heights. The farewell party for Emma's Geneva conference trip was held at my parents' house on a beautiful Saturday evening in late August. The backyard was decorated with string lights and elegant table settings, creating the kind of magazine-perfect atmosphere my mother had always excelled at orchestrating. Extended family members mingled on the patio, celebrating Emma's latest achievement while I stood near the French doors, waiting for the process server to arrive. At exactly 7:30, the doorbell rang. I watched through the living room window as Patricia's associate, a professional process server named David Martinez, approached the front door carrying a manila envelope. Robert answered with his usual confident smile, probably assuming David was a late-arriving guest. "Robert Fletcher?" David asked, his voice carrying clearly across the evening air. "That's correct. You've been served with legal papers regarding the Harrison Educational Trust. You and Linda Fletcher are named as defendants in a complaint filed by Jeffrey Harrison Fletcher." The envelope changed hands, and Robert's face transformed from welcoming host to stunned defendant. Through the window, I watched him open the documents, his complexion turning ashen as he read the first page. David continued his professional script. "Mrs. Fletcher also needs to be served. Is she available?" Linda appeared beside her husband, drawn by the commotion at the front door. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and elegant cocktail dress made her look like someone posing for a country club magazine, rather than a woman about to face serious legal consequences. "Linda Fletcher, you've been served with legal papers regarding the Harrison Educational Trust violation complaint." The second envelope was delivered, and Linda's carefully maintained composure cracked as she scanned the documents. Her sharp intake of breath was audible even from my position across the room. Robert's voice carried a tremor I'd never heard before. "This is a family matter. It doesn't belong in court." David's response was polite but firm. "Sir, the court will determine the appropriate venue for resolving this dispute. You have 30 days to respond to the complaint. Good evening." As David walked back to his car, I stepped onto the patio where our extended family continued their conversations, unaware of the legal bombshell that had just detonated in the front hallway. Within minutes, Robert and Linda emerged from the house, their faces pale and their hands clutching the legal documents. Uncle Frank, my father's brother, noticed their distressed appearance first. "Bob, Linda, what's wrong? You both look like you've seen a ghost." Robert's attempt to maintain normalcy failed completely. "There's been a misunderstanding about family finances. Jeffrey has decided to involve lawyers instead of discussing the matter privately." The patio fell silent as family members processed this unexpected development. Aunt Sarah, my mother's sister, looked confused and concerned. "What kind of financial misunderstanding requires legal papers?" I stepped forward, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Uncle Frank, Aunt Sarah, I think you all deserve to know what's been happening with Grandpa William's Educational Trust." Robert's voice carried a warning edge. "Jeffrey, this is neither the time nor the place for this discussion." "Actually, it's the perfect time," I replied, looking around at the assembled family members who had loved and supported both Emma and me throughout our lives. "You're all here celebrating Emma's latest achievement, which my parents are funding through the educational trust that Grandpa William established for both of us equally." I explained the trust's provisions, the evidence of unequal treatment, and the systematic career sabotage I'd discovered. As the details emerged, the expressions around the patio shifted from confusion to shock to outright anger. Uncle Frank's face reddened as he turned to confront his brother. "Bob, please tell me Jeffrey is mistaken about this. Please tell me you didn't steal his inheritance to benefit Emma exclusively." Robert's response was defensive and weak. "We made financial decisions based on what we believed was best for both children's futures. Jeffrey is twisting our parental guidance into some kind of conspiracy." Aunt Sarah wasn't buying the explanation. "Robert, if the trust specified equal treatment, you had no right to make those decisions. That money belonged to both children equally." Emma, who had been standing frozen near the appetizer table, finally found her voice. "This is ridiculous. Jeffrey is destroying our family over money. He's always been jealous of my success, and now he's trying to punish Mom and Dad for supporting my career." Her words ignited something fierce in my chest. "Emma, this isn't about jealousy. This is about theft. Our parents stole $350,000 that belonged to me, while convincing everyone that you deserved better treatment because you're supposedly more valuable than I am. The number stunned the assembled family. Cousin Jennifer, who worked as a financial planner, shook her head in disbelief. $350,000? That's not parental favoritism. That's grand theft. Linda finally spoke, her voice shaky but still defiant. We've always treated both children fairly, according to their individual needs and potential. Jeffrey is making this sound much worse than it actually is. Then explain this, I said, pulling out my phone to read from the email evidence Patricia had compiled. This is from Dad's email to the trust administrator. Jeffrey lacks Emma's commitment to medicine and will likely change careers within 5 years of graduation. We believe concentrating the trust resources on Emma's surgical training will produce better outcomes. The silence that followed was deafening. Uncle Frank stared at his brother with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. Bob, how could you write something like that about your own son? We were being practical, Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. Medical specialties have different earning potentials and societal impacts. Bullshit, Aunt Sarah said, her usually gentle demeanor replaced by fierce protectiveness. Jeffrey graduated summa cum laude from medical school, just like Emma. He chose family medicine because he wants to serve people who need health care the most. That's not lack of ambition. That's moral courage. The family confrontation continued for another hour, with relatives taking sides and demanding explanations my parents couldn't provide. Emma remained loyal to Robert and Linda, insisting that their decisions had been reasonable and that I was overreacting to normal parental guidance. But the damage was done. By the end of the evening, most of our extended family understood the scope of my parents' betrayal, and many expressed their intention to support me throughout the legal process. As guests departed, the festive atmosphere completely destroyed. Robert made one final attempt to control the narrative. Jeffrey, if you withdraw this lawsuit, we can discuss a more equitable arrangement for your trust funds. Dad, I said, using the title that felt increasingly foreign. You had 25 years to treat me equitably. You chose Emma instead, at every opportunity. Now a judge will decide what equity looks like. The legal battle had begun, but I'd already won the most important victory. My extended family now understood that this wasn't about greed or jealousy, but about justice and basic fairness. Over the following weeks, the court proceedings moved forward with surprising speed. Patricia's evidence was so compelling that my parents' attorney advised them to seek a settlement rather than fight a case they couldn't win. The discovery process revealed even more damaging evidence of my parents' misconduct. Margaret Thornton provided copies of all her correspondence with Robert and Linda, showing a pattern of deception and trust violation that extended back 3 years. Most damaging was the revelation that my parents had been planning to eliminate my inheritance entirely by transferring the remaining trust funds to an educational scholarship in Emma's name. The legal documents they'd prepared showed clear intent to permanently divert my grandfather's money away from his intended beneficiaries. Emma's reputation within the medical community began to suffer as word spread about the legal proceedings. Several colleagues privately expressed concern about her accepting benefits derived from trust fund violations, questioning her judgment and integrity. The Switzerland conference became a public relations disaster when other attendees learned that Emma's participation had been funded through misappropriated trust money. Her presentation was well received academically, but the financial scandal overshadowed her professional achievements. Meanwhile, my own reputation improved as medical colleagues learned about my parents' character assassination campaign. 3 residency programs that had previously rejected my applications reached out to reconsider their decisions, having discovered that my parents' negative references had been motivated by financial rather than professional concerns. The legal momentum was building in my favor, but the personal cost was enormous. Emma refused to speak with me, and my parents treated me like an enemy who had invaded their home. The family I'd known my entire life was disintegrating, but I'd learned that family built on lies and favoritism wasn't worth preserving. The court hearing took place on a gray October morning in downtown Denver, 6 weeks after the legal papers had been served. Judge Patricia Reynolds, a stern woman in her 50s with a reputation for no-nonsense judicial decisions, presided over what had become a high-stakes family drama with serious legal implications. Patricia presented our case with devastating precision, walking the judge through each piece of evidence that demonstrated my parents' systematic violation of the trust terms. The email correspondence, financial records, and Margaret Thornton's testimony painted a picture of deliberate misconduct that exceeded simple parental favoritism. "Your Honor," Patricia said, gesturing toward the evidence table, "the defendants didn't simply prefer one child over another. They engaged in a coordinated campaign to steal the plaintiff's inheritance while simultaneously sabotaging his career opportunities through false character references and professional undermining." My parents' attorney, a nervous young man named Kevin Walsh, who clearly wished he was handling any other case, attempted to argue that Robert and Linda's decisions had been made in good faith based on their assessment of their children's needs and potential. Judge Reynolds wasn't impressed. "Counselor, the trust language is unambiguous. The grantor specified equal treatment for both beneficiaries. The defendants' personal opinions about their children's career choices are irrelevant to their legal obligations as trust administrators." The hearing's turning point came when Margaret Thornton testified about my parents' threats to replace her when she questioned the unequal distributions. Her 30 years of experience managing trusts gave her testimony enormous credibility, and her obvious discomfort with my parents' conduct resonated strongly with Judge Reynolds. "In 3 decades of trust administration," Margaret said, "I've never encountered such blatant disregard for a grantor's explicit wishes. The defendants repeatedly ignored my warnings about trust violations and threatened my position when I attempted to enforce equal treatment provisions." Kevin Walsh's cross-examination of Margaret failed completely. His questions only reinforced the evidence of my parents' misconduct, and Margaret's detailed documentation left no room for alternative interpretations of events. Emma testified on behalf of our parents, arguing that their decisions had been reasonable and that I was motivated by jealousy rather than legitimate grievance. Her testimony backfired spectacularly when Patricia's cross-examination revealed the extent of advantages Emma had received without questioning their fairness. "Miss Fletcher," Patricia said, "did you ever ask your parents why your brother wasn't receiving similar support for conference attendance, professional development, or debt relief?" Emma's answer was damaging. "I assumed Jeffrey didn't need the same level of support because he'd chosen a less demanding specialty. And you accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in educational funding without verifying that your brother was receiving equal treatment as specified in your grandfather's trust." I trusted my parents' judgment about financial matters. Judge Reynolds took notes throughout Emma's testimony, her expression growing more disapproving as Emma revealed her willful blindness to the obvious inequity. The defense's case collapsed entirely when Kevin Walsh attempted to argue that my choice of family medicine justified the unequal treatment. Judge Reynolds interrupted his argument with barely contained anger. "Counselor, are you seriously suggesting that one medical specialty is inherently more valuable than another? That a physician who chooses to serve underserved populations deserves less support than one who chooses surgery?" Kevin Walsh's stammered response only made matters worse. "Your Honor, the defendants believed that surgical specialties offer greater earning potential and societal contribution. The defendants' beliefs about medical specialties are irrelevant to their legal obligations," Judge Reynolds snapped. "They were trust administrators, not career counselors, and they violated their fiduciary duties in the most egregious manner possible." During the lunch recess, Patricia pulled me aside with news that changed everything. "Jeffrey, our investigator found something that makes this case even stronger. Your parents haven't just violated the trust terms with you. They've been embezzling money for personal expenses." The evidence was devastating. Financial records showed that Robert and Linda had used trust funds to purchase a vacation home in Aspen, finance expensive European vacations, and buy luxury items including Linda's new Mercedes and Robert's boat. The total misappropriation exceeded $200,000 beyond the money they'd redirected to Emma's benefit. "This moves the case from civil trust violations into potential criminal territory," Patricia explained. "They could face fraud charges and professional sanctions that would end their legal careers." When the hearing resumed, Patricia presented the embezzlement evidence with clinical precision. The courtroom fell silent as the scope of my parents' misconduct became clear. They hadn't just favored one child over another. They'd stolen from both of us to fund their own lifestyle. Judge Reynolds's anger was palpable as she reviewed the financial documents. "Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher, you've not only violated your obligations to your children, but you've engaged in what appears to be criminal conversion of trust assets. I'm ordering an immediate freeze of all remaining trust funds and referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation." Robert's face went white as the implications sank in. Linda began crying softly, her perfectly maintained composure finally cracking completely. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. She ordered immediate restitution of all funds that should have been distributed to me, plus interest and punitive damages totaling $450,000. She removed my parents as trust administrators and appointed Margaret Thornton as the permanent trustee with authority to ensure equal treatment going forward. But the most satisfying moment came when Judge Reynolds addressed my parents directly. "Your conduct in this matter represents a flagrant violation of basic fiduciary principles and fundamental parental fairness. You've stolen from your own son while enriching yourselves and your favored daughter. The court finds your behavior morally reprehensible and legally indefensible." Emma's fellowship funding was immediately frozen, pending a full accounting of how trust funds had been used for her benefit. Johns Hopkins Hospital, unwilling to be associated with a financial scandal involving misappropriated educational funds, suspended her fellowship pending resolution of the legal issues. Outside the courthouse, reporters who had picked up the story were waiting for comments. The case had attracted attention as an example of how family wealth could corrupt basic parental relationships, and several legal experts had already published opinions criticizing my parents' conduct. "How do you feel about today's outcome?" a reporter asked as I walked down the courthouse steps with Patricia. "I feel like justice has been served," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. This was never about money. It was about holding people accountable when they violate their legal and moral obligations, even when those people are your own parents. The reporter turned to Robert and Linda, who were leaving through a side exit with Kevin Walsh. "Do you have any comment about the judge's ruling?" Robert's response was bitter. "This family dispute should have been resolved privately. We're disappointed that our son chose litigation over family discussion." But his words rang hollow after the evidence that had been presented. The entire legal community now understood that this hadn't been a family dispute but a clear case of financial misconduct and trust violation. That evening, Jessica and I celebrated quietly at our favorite restaurant. The legal victory felt surreal after months of preparation and stress, but the financial security it provided would change my life completely. "So what happens now?" Jessica asked over dinner. "Now I get to practice medicine without crushing debt," I said. "And I get to prove that my parents were wrong about my commitment to family medicine. The settlement money would allow me to pay off my student loans, establish a solid financial foundation, and pursue my goals without the constant pressure of debt service. But more importantly, the legal victory had vindicated my worth as a physician and a person. My parents' professional reputations were in ruins. The Colorado Bar Association had opened an investigation into their conduct, and several clients had already terminated their representation. The vacation home would need to be sold to satisfy the restitution order, and their law firm faced potential dissolution. Emma's surgical career, while not destroyed, had been significantly damaged by association with the financial scandal. She would eventually complete her fellowship, but the controversy had cost her opportunities and professional relationships that might never be fully repaired. Justice had been served, but the personal cost was enormous. My family was broken, perhaps permanently, and the relationships that had defined my life for 28 years were gone. But as I looked across the dinner table at Jessica, who had supported me through the darkest period of my life, I realized that some families are chosen rather than inherited. Sometimes the people who truly love you are the ones who stand by you when your own parents fail. 6 months after the court ruling, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The $450,000 settlement had eliminated my student debt entirely and provided the financial foundation I needed to pursue my medical career without constant monetary pressure. But more importantly, the legal victory had given me something even more valuable: validation of my worth and my choices. I used part of the settlement to establish the William Harrison Medical Scholarship Fund, designed specifically to support medical students from disadvantaged backgrounds who lacked family financial support. The scholarship prioritized students pursuing primary care specialties, recognizing that family medicine, internal medicine, and pediatrics served the most vulnerable populations despite offering lower earning potential than surgical specialties. The first scholarship recipient was Maria Santos, a brilliant first-generation college student whose parents worked as janitors to support her education. When I handed her the check that would cover her final 2 years of medical school tuition, her tears reminded me why I'd chosen medicine in the first place. "Dr. Fletcher," she said, "this scholarship means I can focus on studying instead of working 3 jobs to pay for school. You're changing my entire future." Her gratitude reinforced my conviction that helping others succeed was more fulfilling than any personal achievement could ever be. My relationship with Jessica had grown stronger throughout the legal ordeal. She'd seen me at my lowest point and supported me through every difficult decision, never once suggesting that I should accept my parents' treatment for the sake of family harmony. When I proposed to her on Christmas Eve, overlooking the lights of downtown Denver, her answer came without hesitation. "Jeffrey, you've shown me what real integrity looks like," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Of course I'll marry you." Our engagement represented more than romantic love. It symbolized the beginning of a new family built on mutual respect, honest communication, and shared values rather than obligation and favoritism. My medical career flourished in ways that surprised everyone, including myself. 3 prestigious family medicine programs had reached out to recruit me after learning about my parents' character assassination campaign, and I'd accepted a position at Denver Health, the city's safety net hospital serving primarily uninsured and underinsured patients. The work was challenging, but incredibly rewarding. My patients included homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, single mothers struggling to make ends meet, and elderly people abandoned by their own families. Each day reminded me that medicine's true purpose wasn't maximizing income, but serving those who needed care most desperately. Dr. Rachel Kim, my attending physician and mentor, had become a strong advocate for my career development. "Jeffrey, you have a gift for connecting with patients others have given up on," she told me during my 6-month evaluation. "That's not something that can be taught." Her words meant more than any parental praise ever had because they were earned through merit rather than given through biological obligation. The legal consequences for my parents had been severe but appropriate. The Colorado Bar Association had suspended Robert's law license for 2 years and placed Linda on professional probation for ethical violations related to their trust management. Their law firm had dissolved, and both were required to complete extensive continuing education on fiduciary responsibilities before being eligible for license restoration. The criminal investigation had ultimately resulted in plea agreements that avoided jail time but required full restitution and community service. Robert and Linda were ordered to complete 500 hours of volunteer work with legal aid organizations serving low-income families, a punishment that forced them to confront the populations they'd previously ignored. The vacation home in Aspen had been sold to satisfy the restitution requirements, and my parents had been forced to downsize to a modest condominium in Aurora. The financial consequences were significant, but they paled in comparison to the reputational damage that had destroyed their professional standing. Margaret Thornton had proved to be an excellent trust administrator, ensuring that the remaining funds were managed according to my grandfather's wishes. She'd also implemented oversight procedures to prevent future violations and provided regular reporting that maintained transparency in all financial decisions. Most surprisingly, Emma had eventually approached me with genuine remorse about her role in the family's dysfunction. The conversation took place on a snowy afternoon in February, when she appeared at my apartment door looking exhausted and humbled. "Jeffrey, I need to apologize," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I've spent months thinking about everything that happened, and I realize how wrong I was to accept our parents' favoritism without questioning it." Her acknowledgement of wrongdoing was the first step toward potential reconciliation, but I was cautious about rebuilding trust too quickly. "Emma, you didn't just accept their favoritism," I said. "You defended it and justified it, even when the evidence was overwhelming. You told me I didn't deserve equal treatment because my career choice was less valuable than yours." She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know. I was so caught up in feeling special and chosen that I convinced myself our parents' treatment was fair. I didn't want to examine it too closely because that would have meant acknowledging that I didn't deserve the advantages I'd received. Our reconciliation was gradual and sometimes painful, But Emma's willingness to confront her own complicity in the family's dysfunction made healing possible. She'd completed her fellowship despite the controversy, and her surgical skills had earned her a position at Children's Hospital Colorado, where she was building her career through merit rather than parental influence. The most difficult relationship to navigate was with my parents themselves. Robert and Linda had made several attempts to reconcile, but their efforts felt hollow and self-serving rather than genuinely remorseful. "Jeffrey, we made mistakes in how we handled the trust funds," Robert had said during one particularly uncomfortable family therapy session, "but everything we did was motivated by love and concern for both you and Emma." His words revealed that he still didn't understand the fundamental problem with their behavior. They continued to frame their theft and favoritism as misguided love rather than the systematic betrayal it had actually been. Linda's approach was even more problematic. "Honey, we're family," she would say whenever I declined invitations to family gatherings. "Family forgives and moves forward together, but forgiveness required genuine repentance, and my parents remained convinced that their only mistake had been getting caught, rather than engaging in the misconduct itself." The family therapy sessions continued sporadically, with mixed results. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, our therapist, had made it clear that rebuilding family relationships would require my parents to acknowledge the full scope of their wrongdoing and accept responsibility for the damage they'd caused. Robert and Linda, Dr. Walsh had said during one session, "Jeffrey isn't asking you to grovel or punish yourselves indefinitely. He's asking you to understand that your actions weren't mistakes but choices, and that those choices had devastating consequences for your son's financial security, career prospects, and emotional well-being." Progress was slow, but there were occasional moments of genuine breakthrough. During one session in late spring, Linda finally admitted that their treatment of me had been fundamentally unfair. "Jeffrey, I can't undo what we did," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I want you to know that I understand now how much we hurt you. We convinced ourselves that we were being practical, but we were really just favoring Emma because it was easier than treating you equally." Her acknowledgement felt genuine, and it represented the first step toward potential healing. As I reflected on the entire experience, several profound life lessons had emerged from the chaos and betrayal. The most important was that standing up for yourself when family dynamics become toxic isn't selfish or disloyal, but necessary for maintaining your dignity and self-worth. I'd learned that unconditional love doesn't mean accepting unfair treatment, and that sometimes fighting back against injustice is the only way to achieve genuine healing and establish healthy boundaries. The experience had also taught me that chosen family can be just as meaningful as biological family, and that relationships built on mutual respect and shared values are often stronger than those based solely on genetic connection. Most importantly, I discovered that my parents' assessment of my worth had been wrong from the beginning. Family medicine wasn't a lesser specialty, but a calling that required compassion, dedication, and intellectual rigor equal to any surgical discipline. My choice to serve underserved populations wasn't lack of ambition but moral courage that made a real difference in people's lives. The scholarship fund continued to grow, supporting medical students who might otherwise be unable to complete their education. Each recipient reminded me that financial barriers shouldn't determine who gets to become a physician, and that investing in diverse medical professionals ultimately benefits everyone. Jessica and I were planning our wedding for the following summer, with a guest list that included our chosen family of friends, supportive relatives, and colleagues who'd stood by us during the difficult times. Emma would be there, having earned her place through genuine remorse and changed behavior. My parents' invitation remained conditional on their continued progress in therapy and their willingness to accept responsibility for their actions. The future looked brighter than I'd ever imagined possible during those dark months when I'd discovered the scope of my family's betrayal. I was practicing medicine in exactly the way I'd always envisioned, serving patients who needed advocates and healers rather than simply providers of expensive procedures. The financial security provided by the legal settlement allowed me to focus on patient care rather than debt service, and the scholarship fund ensured that other students would have similar opportunities to pursue their calling without crushing financial pressure. Most importantly, I'd learned to value myself based on my own achievements and moral choices rather than my parents' flawed assessment of my worth. The young man who'd stood outside Emma's debt-free celebration party feeling worthless and abandoned had grown into someone who understood his own value and wasn't afraid to fight for what he deserved. As I finished my evening rounds at Denver Health, checking on patients who relied on me for care they couldn't afford elsewhere, I realized that my grandfather's trust fund had accomplished exactly what he'd intended. It had given me the freedom to pursue medicine for the right reasons, serving those who needed help most, rather than those who could pay the highest fees. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed my family had ultimately led to my liberation from their toxic dynamics and my discovery of what truly mattered in life: integrity, compassion, and the courage to stand up for justice, even when the people opposing you are your own parents. Have you ever had to stand up to family members when their treatment of you became fundamentally unfair? Sometimes the people who should love us most are the ones who hurt us deepest. But fighting back isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your dignity and establishing boundaries that protect your future. I'd love to hear your thoughts about family dynamics and how to handle situations when love becomes conditional on accepting unfair treatment. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to show your support for anyone who's had to fight for fair treatment within their own family. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding the strength to stand up for what's right, even when it's painful. And please share this with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Sometimes we all need to hear that we're not alone in these difficult situations. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond when that treatment becomes unacceptable. Keep fighting for the respect and fairness you deserve, and never let anyone convince you that you're asking for too much when you're simply asking to be treated as an equal.